Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The oppressive Port Charles humidity did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the city. It was a chill born not of weather, but of a lingering, unresolved violence. The shooting of Drew Cain had sent shockwaves through the community, leaving a scar that was still raw, still throbbing with unanswered questions. The police had theories, of course. There was always a convenient underworld figure, a disgruntled business rival from a forgotten case, or the ever-present, shadowy threat from Jason Morgan's old life. But the investigation had stalled, mired in dead ends and contradictory evidence. The bullet, a clean, professional shot, had come from a high-powered rifle, and the shooter had vanished into the tapestry of the city without a trace. Drew himself, though recovering, was plagued by a foggy memory of the event, a flash of light, the crack of the rifle, and then nothing. No face, no motive, just the searing pain and the long, arduous road back. Meanwhile, at the Quartermain mansion, life proceeded with its typical blend of gothic drama and farce. Tracy Quartermain held court with her usual acerbic wit, managing the family's vast business interests and personal entanglements with a weary, practiced hand. Ned was embroiled in his ELQ schemes, Brooklyn was chasing her musical dreams, and Monica, the family's matriarch, maintained a quiet, dignified sadness that seemed as permanent a fixture as the grand staircase. The family was a constellation of bright, chaotic stars, but one around which they all still, unconsciously, orbited was missing. Edward Quartermain. His portrait, a grandiose and slightly mischievous depiction, still dominated the main drawing room wall. They spoke of him often, in the past tense, with a mixture of fond exasperation and genuine grief. He was their patriarch, their scoundrel, their legend. His death had been a monumental affair, a heart attack at the office, a fitting end for a man who valued commerce and family in near equal measure. The funeral had been the social event of the season. He was buried in the family crypt, his legacy secure, his antics a source of endless, cherished stories. But the truth, as it often is in Port Charles, was far stranger than the fiction the family lived. Deep beneath the Quartermain estate, in a sub-basement that didn't appear on any architectural blueprint, behind a false wall of wine racks in a climate-controlled cellar that had been built during the Cold War, Edward Quartermain was very much alive. The room was not a dungeon, it was a comfortable, if anachronistic, suite. Persian rugs covered the cold stone floor. A large, leather-topped desk was littered with financial newspapers, stock reports, and a state-of-the-art computer monitor showing real-time security feeds from across the property. A vintage radio played classical music. He had his books, his brandy, and his plans. He looked older than the portrait upstairs, of course. The lines on his face were more deeply etched, and his hands, once so firm and commanding, now bore a slight tremor. But the fire in his eyes was undimmed. It was a fire of cunning, of impatience, and of a desperate, paternal love that had curdled into something far more controlling and dangerous. His sole confidant, his anchor in this world of shadows, was his longtime butler and accomplice, Reginald. It was Reginald who brought him his meals, who managed the delicate logistics of his existence, and who, on one fateful evening, had been the driver of the car that spirited Edward away from his own funeral, leaving a weighted coffin to be interred in his place. "The city is still buzzing, sir," Reginald said, placing a tray with a single glass of amber liquid on the desk. "The police are no closer to finding the assailant. They're chasing ghosts in the Balkan Syndicate now." Edward grunted, taking a slow sip of the brandy. "Incompetent fools. The Balkan Syndicate couldn't orchestrate a successful picnic, let alone a surgical strike like that." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on a monitor showing a live feed of the garden where Drew Cain, still moving stiffly, was walking with Sam McCall. "He's looking stronger. Resilient boy. I'll give him that." "It was a significant risk, sir," Reginald said, his voice a low, neutral murmur. "The shot was precise, but the margin for error was calculated," Edward snapped, his eyes flashing. "I didn't spend a fortune on that Swiss marksmanship course for nothing. And I didn't build the Quartermain empire on timidity. Sometimes, Reginald, a surgeon must cause a little pain to remove a cancer." The cancer, in Edward's twisted, patriarchal logic, was Drew Cain. Or more specifically, the threat Drew posed to the future of the Quartermain legacy. Edward's faked death had not been an act of cowardice. It was the first move in a grand, final strategy. From his gilded prison, he had watched his family with a hawk's eye. He saw the squabbling, the petty jealousies, the way the new generation seemed to lack the iron will that had built the Quartermain name from the docks up. He saw Ned's ambition, but also his sentimentality. He saw Tracy's brilliance, but also her distraction with romantic folly. And he saw Michael Corinthos, his own great-grandson, becoming more his father's son every day, a development that filled Edward with a cold dread. His plan was simple in its objective, but Byzantine in its execution, to forge his family into the unstoppable dynasty it was always meant to be. To force them, through crisis and consolidation, to unite under the Quartermain banner, to prioritize blood and name above all else. He believed they had grown soft, diluted by their associations with the Corinthos family and their various moral compasses. They needed a common enemy. They needed a fire lit under them. And Drew Cain had become the perfect kindling. It had started subtly. Edward, through a series of untraceable shell companies and intermediaries, began to undermine Drew's position at Aurora Media. A bad investment here, a leaked piece of damaging information there. He'd manipulated stock prices, planted rumors in the press, all designed to make Drew look incompetent, reckless. He wanted to isolate him, to make him vulnerable. But Drew was more resilient than Edward had anticipated. He had the support of Sam, of his brother Jason, when he was in the picture, and most gallingly, of Michael, who saw Drew as a mentor and a friend. This alliance between Michael and Drew was the deepest cut. Edward saw it as a betrayal of their blood. Michael was a Quartermain. His loyalty, his energy, his future, should be devoted to ELQ, the family's crown jewel. But Drew, with his Aurora Media and his righteous, do-gooder attitude, was pulling Michael's focus, diverting Quartermain resources and influence into ventures Edward deemed frivolous. In Edward's mind, Drew wasn't just a business rival, he was a corrupting influence, a siren song luring the next generation of Quartermains away from their birthright. The final straw had been a proposed merger. Drew and Michael were in advanced talks to deeply intertwine Aurora and ELQ's media holdings. To Edward, this wasn't a merger, it was a hostile takeover, a Trojan horse. It would put a man who wasn't a Quartermain by blood in a position of immense power over the family's destiny. He couldn't allow it. A boardroom battle was too uncertain. The family was too fractured. He needed something more dramatic, more visceral. He needed a martyr, or rather, he needed to create a situation where Drew was the victim, but in a way that would ultimately benefit the Quartermains. Shooting Drew was never about murder. It was about control. It was a message, written in gunpowder and blood. The planning had been meticulous. He'd chosen the location, a public space where Drew felt safe, to maximize the shock value. He'd used a rifle he'd acquired decades ago, one that could never be traced to him. He'd studied Drew's routines, his security detail, the blind spots in the city's surveillance. The shot was designed to wound, to incapacitate, to send a shock through the system without ending a life. Edward was many things, a schemer, a manipulator, a tyrant, but he wasn't a cold-blooded killer. At least, that's what he told himself in the dead of night. This was business. The most important business of his life, the business of family. The aftermath had unfolded largely as he'd predicted. The shooting had sent the entire city, and his family in particular, into a state of high alert. It had drawn them all closer together, into the protective shell of the Quartermain mansion. Old grudges were momentarily set aside. Tracy and Ned were united in their outrage. Michael's Corinthos instincts for retribution were activated, but they were now channeled through a Quartermain lens. The threat to Drew was perceived as a threat to them all, a threat to the new, more enlightened world they were trying to build. The irony was delicious to Edward. They were uniting against a phantom he had created. He watched it all from his underground lair. He saw the fear in their eyes, the renewed sense of purpose. It was working. The family was being tempered in the fire of this crisis. But a new, unforeseen variable had entered the equation, the investigation itself. Detective Harrison Chase, earnest and dogged, was refusing to let the case go cold. And he was getting closer than anyone, including Edward, could have anticipated. It started with a seemingly insignificant detail. A traffic camera a mile from the shooting scene had captured a blurry image of a vintage car, a model favored by collectors, turning down an alley. It was an anomaly. The car didn't fit the profile. The Balkan Syndicate used modern, anonymous sedans. Chase, operating on a hunch, began cross-referencing the owners of such vehicles in the Port Charles area. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, down below, Edward was growing restless. The initial phase of his plan was complete, but the family's unity was still fragile. He needed to escalate. He began a new campaign of psychological manipulation. Using encrypted, untraceable methods, he started sending messages. Not threats, but warnings. A note to Michael slipped into his ELQ paperwork that read, "Consolidate your assets. The wolf is at the door." An email to Tracy, from a dummy account, suggesting that old rivals are watching, waiting for a sign of weakness. He was the ghost in their machine, the unseen hand guiding them toward the fortress he wanted them to become. He even targeted Drew, who was now plagued by more than just physical pain. A letter arrived at Drew's penthouse, typed on old-fashioned bond paper. It contained no direct threats, only a cryptic passage from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. It was signed with a single, elegant initial, Q. Drew showed the letter to Sam and Michael. Q? Quartermain? Michael had been horrified. That's insane. Who in my family would do this? Why? It's a sick joke, Sam insisted, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. Someone trying to mess with us, to capitalize on the shooting. But Drew was quiet. He'd been having flashes, not of the shooting itself, but of the moments before. A glint of light from a high window. The cry of a specific bird that nested in the old, gnarled oaks near the Quartermain estate. A scent on the air, a peculiar mixture of expensive cigar smoke and the specific, dusty aroma of old books. It was a scent he associated with one place, and one place only, the Quartermain Mansion Library. He didn't voice these suspicions. They felt too absurd, too disloyal to the family that had, in many ways, taken him in. But the seed was planted. Back in the sub-basement, Edward was reviewing security footage from the night he'd sent the letter to Drew. He'd been careful, using Reginald to handle the physical drop, but he saw a flaw. A new, citywide camera, installed just the week before, had caught a fleeting glimpse of Reginald's coat sleeve as he deposited the envelope in the outgoing mail. It was nothing, a phantom image, but it was a data point. The city is adding more eyes, Reginald, Edward muttered, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of the monitor. It's becoming a prison of light. Perhaps it is time to consider concluding the strategy, sir, Reginald suggested gently. The family is wary. They are looking over their shoulders. The desired effect may have been achieved. Achieved? Edward laughed, a dry, rasping sound. They're huddling together, Reginald, like frightened sheep. I need them to become wolves. They need to be angry. They need to be ruthless. This is just fear. Fear is not a foundation. It's a reaction. He pointed a bony finger at the screen showing Michael's office. He's still talking about rebuilding Aurora with Drew. He hasn't learned the lesson. It was then that Edward made his second, and nearly fatal, mistake. Impatient, he decided to force Michael's hand. He orchestrated a complex financial attack on one of Aurora's key subsidiaries, a move designed to look like corporate sabotage from a rival conglomerate. The plan was to push Aurora to the brink of collapse, forcing Michael to choose between saving Drew's company or pouring all his resources into protecting ELQ. The scheme was brilliant in its financial cruelty. But it left a digital footprint. A complex money trail, winding through offshore accounts, eventually led to a shell corporation that, upon deeper investigation by a forensic accountant hired by the PCPD, was found to be linked to a trust fund Edward had set up for a secret, personal project decades ago, a project even his family knew nothing about. Detective Chase, piecing together the traffic camera footage, the mysterious Q letters, and now this financial thread, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The connections were tenuous, circumstantial, but they all pointed in one, impossible direction. He went to see Laura Collins, the commissioner, his theories sounding insane even to his own ears. "Laura, I know how this sounds," he said, spreading the documents on her desk. "The car is a 1972 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. There are only 3 registered in the county. One belongs to a museum, one is in storage in Albany, and the third was the personal vehicle of Edward Quartermain." Laura stared at him, her expression a mask of professional calm. "Edward Quartermain is dead, Harrison. We all attended his funeral." "I know. But the financials, this shell corporation, Praetorian Holdings. It was used to purchase a specialized, long-range rifle in Belgium 5 years ago. The ballistics are a match for the Kane shooting. And Praetorian was funded by a trust established by Edward in the 1980s. It could be someone using his old assets," Laura reasoned, though her face was pale. "A disgruntled employee. A family member." The Q letters, Chase pressed on. The scent Drew remembered, cigars and old books. "It's him, Laura. I know it sounds like madness, but what if he's not dead? What if all of this is him?" Laura was silent for a long time, the weight of the implication crushing. Edward Quartermain was a pillar of the community. The scandal would be catastrophic. The damage to the family, it was unthinkable. "This stays between us," she said finally, her voice low and firm. "You do not breathe a word of this to anyone. Not to your partner, not to your wife. We need irrefutable proof. If you're wrong, you'll destroy your career. If you're right," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The noose was tightening, and Edward, in his arrogance, felt the first faint brush of its fibers against his neck. He noticed an anomaly in the financial tracking software he used to monitor the family's accounts. A query, sophisticated and hidden, had pinged the Praetorian Holdings files. Someone was looking. Someone who knew what they were looking for. A rare flicker of genuine fear passed through him. This was not part of the plan. He had anticipated police incompetence, family denial, but not this kind of intelligent, persistent digging. He called for Reginald. "We have a problem," Edward said, his voice losing some of its customary bluster. "The Praetorian files have been accessed." Reginald's face, usually a placid mask, showed genuine alarm. "Sir, that is concerning. The trail, if followed diligently. I know where it leads." Edward snapped. He stood, pacing the limited confines of his room. "It's that Chase boy. Too smart for his own good. Just like his father." He stopped, his mind racing, discarding one contingency plan after another. He couldn't kill Chase. That would be an admission of guilt, a messy, emotional act far beneath him. He needed to discredit him, to redirect him. He devised a new scheme, a piece of misdirection worthy of a grandmaster. He would use one mystery to bury another. He began forging evidence, a few digital breadcrumbs, a fabricated eyewitness statement, a financial transfer that would point directly to a known, but elusive, international industrial spy named Alistair Croon. Croon was a ghost, a convenient scapegoat who had been implicated in corporate espionage from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. The narrative would be perfect. Croon had been hired by a rival to destabilize ELQ by taking out Drew Kane, a key ally. The vintage car? A rental, since disposed of. The financials? Croon was a master of laundering money through old, defunct corporate entities like Praetorian. It was a work of art, a tapestry of lies woven with just enough truth to be believable. And Edward, the master weaver, set the loom in motion. As this was happening, Drew's subconscious was finally breaking through the wall his trauma had built. He dreamt of the shooting, not as a blur, but with a terrifying new clarity. In the dream, he saw the window, the rifle barrel. And just for a second, before the flash, he saw the shooter's face. It was lined with age, the eyes burning with a fierce, almost divine intensity. the eyes were framed by a shock of white hair. They were the eyes from the portrait in the drawing room. He woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, the name on his lips, Edward. He told Sam, who stared at him in stunned silence. "Drew, that's impossible." "Is it?" Drew's voice was raw. The cue, the scent, the fact that all of this has somehow, against all odds, made the Quartermaines stronger, more paranoid, more insular. It's exactly what he would have wanted. He was always trying to toughen us up, to teach us about the real world. This is his final, twisted lesson. Sam, a woman well acquainted with Port Charles's capacity for the unbelievable, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "We have to tell someone." "Tell them what?" Drew asked, a bitter laugh escaping him. "That I had a dream a dead man shot me? Chase would have me committed. But we need to watch. We need to be ready." The climax arrived on a stormy night. The wind howled around the Quartermaine mansion, rattling the old window panes. Inside, the family was gathered for a tense dinner. The Croon theory was now the PCPD's leading one, thanks to Edward's masterful manipulation of the evidence. A sense of grim resolution had settled over them. They had a name, a face, a target for their anger. Down below, Edward listened to the dinner conversation through a hidden microphone. He heard Michael vowing to use all of ELQ's resources to hunt down Croon. He heard Tracy speaking of fortifying our position. He heard Ned discussing a new, more aggressive business strategy. He smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. They were becoming what he had always wanted them to be. They were wolves. But his triumph was short-lived. A new alert flashed on his monitor. A motion sensor had been triggered in the wine cellar, the one that led to his secret door. It wasn't Reginald, he was upstairs, serving dinner. Someone else was down there. It was Drew. Armed with nothing but his conviction and a flashlight, he had decided to act on his dream. He remembered Edward showing him the wine cellar years ago, boasting about its secrets. He remembered the man's love of hidden panels and clandestine spaces. He was moving along the wall, tapping, listening for a hollow sound. Upstairs, the dinner was interrupted by an argument between Brooklyn and Ned, their raised voices masking the faint, scrabbling sounds from below. Edward watched Drew on the monitor, his heart hammering against his frail ribs. This was the one variable he had never truly accounted for, Drew's own latent memories, his Jason Morgan-trained instincts, leading him directly to the heart of the secret. He couldn't let him find the door. He made a decision. He picked up an old, secure landline phone and dialed a single, pre-programmed number. It rang in the pocket of a man standing in the shadows across the street from the mansion, a freelance operative Edward kept on retainer for extreme emergencies. "The package is in the cellar," Edward said, his voice cold and clear. "Contain it. Non-lethally." He then did the unthinkable. He opened the hidden door from the inside. Drew froze as a section of the wine rack swung inward, revealing a sliver of warm light and the faint sound of a classical adagio. His breath caught in his throat. It was real. It was all real. He stepped through the opening, into the room. And there he was. Edward Quartermaine, standing before his desk, looking not like a ghost, but like a very old, very tired king in his underground court. The two men stared at each other, the silence broken only by the storm outside and the soft music from the radio. "Hello, Drew," Edward said, his voice echoing with a strange mix of weariness and pride. "I suppose you've come for answers." "You shot me," Drew said, the words not a question, but an accusation, a final, horrible confirmation. "I did," Edward replied, without a hint of remorse. "A necessary procedure. You were a foreign body, a threat to the health of this family. I had to provoke an immune response. You're insane. I am a visionary." Edward shot back, his eyes blazing. "Look at them. Look at what they've become because of you. They're strong again. They're united. They remember what it means to be a Quartermaine. You were the sacrifice on the altar of our legacy." Before Drew could respond, a figure emerged from the darkness behind him. The operative. Drew, his senses still dulled from his recovery, was caught off guard. A sharp, precise blow to the back of his neck, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Edward looked down at him, a complex swirl of emotions on his face, triumph, regret, and a flicker of something that might have been pity. Take him to the old gatehouse, he instructed the operative. Keep him sedated. I'm not finished yet. As the man hauled Drew away, Edward turned back to his monitors. The family was still arguing upstairs, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded beneath their feet. His plan was in shambles, his secret exposed to the one man who could truly destroy it. But Edward Quartermain was a fighter. He had been cornered before. He would adapt. He would find a way to turn even this catastrophe to his advantage. The game was not over. For the Quartermains, the game was never over. It was simply waiting for the next move. And Edward, alive and desperate in the belly of the house he built, was already plotting it. The storm raged on, a fitting symphony for the tempest that was about to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting family above. Edward being alive and suddenly emerging as the man who shot Drew has shaken the foundation of Port Charles in ways no one could have predicted. The story had been buried for so long that most characters, and even viewers, had accepted the idea that Edward's name was confined to history, never to resurface again. For years, Drew's shooting was one of those lingering questions that seemed to carry no real answer, a crime with motives tangled up in secrets, money, and power. But now, as the shocking reveal unfolds, the pieces of the puzzle begin to lock into place, and the revelation of Edward's survival throws every character into a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and painful reckoning. It isn't just about who pulled the trigger, it's about the fact that a man presumed gone, a man believed to be buried in the past, has returned with a secret so dark that it changes the very course of every life touched by Drew's tragedy. At the center of the storm is Drew himself, a man who has fought tirelessly to rebuild his life after loss, betrayal, and violence. The memory of being gunned down haunted him not only because of the physical scars but also because of the unanswered questions of why. To discover that Edward, someone linked to his own family's legacy, was the person who nearly ended his life cuts deeper than any bullet wound ever could. For Drew, the questions pile on: why did Edward do it, why hide for so long, and what twisted sense of justification could have driven a man like him to such an act? There is no easy answer, and the lack of clarity only fuels Drew's rage and determination to confront Edward face to face. This isn't just about seeking justice anymore, it's about closure, about demanding the truth from a man who has risen from the shadows and turned Port Charles upside down. The reactions ripple outward, affecting every corner of the town. Jason, Drew's long-lost twin, is caught in the middle of it all, torn between the urge to protect his brother and the complicated history that Edward represents. Jason's life has always been tangled up with secrets, and now, this shocking revelation tests his loyalty and sense of justice in ways he's never experienced before. Can Jason stand by Drew as he battles Edward, or will the weight of the Quartermain legacy pull him in a direction that creates tension between the brothers? The dynamic between Jason and Drew, already layered with years of misunderstandings and betrayals, is about to face its most brutal test yet. Carly, ever the fierce protector, is quick to side with Drew, outraged that Edward could dare return and bring such devastation into their lives. For Carly, it isn't just about Drew, it's about the fact that Edward's deception and violence could threaten everyone she loves. She's lived through her fair share of betrayals, but the idea of a Quartermain patriarch plotting in the shadows ignites a fury in her that won't be easily contained. Carly's protective streak over Drew, combined with her unwavering loyalty to Jason, puts her in the middle of the storm as well, and she isn't afraid to make her voice heard. Her fiery confrontation with Edward is something that many in Port Charles have been waiting for, as Carly refuses to let him manipulate or charm his way out of accountability. Meanwhile, the rest of the Quartermain family reels from the revelation in ways that are both heartbreaking and explosive. For years, the Quartermains have carried the weight of their family name with a mix of pride and shame, and now, Edward's resurrection from presumed death adds another layer of scandal that shakes their already fragile bonds. Monica, the matriarch who has endured more losses than most could survive, is blindsided by the truth. To learn that Edward has been alive all this time is devastating in itself, but to discover that he was the one who put Drew's life in jeopardy is nearly unbearable. Monica's world crumbles as she questions not only the man Edward has become but also the man he always was. Was everything a lie? Did she ever truly know him? Her pain runs deep, and it sends shockwaves through the entire Quartermain household.